The air in the Hollywood studio crackled with tension, as if a storm was about to break. The live audience, packed into tiered seats, shifted uncomfortably, their murmurs barely masking the hostility radiating from the stage. It was supposed to be a simple talk show taping, a rare appearance by Clint Eastwood on Ellen DeGeneres' set, but the atmosphere was anything but friendly. The cameras rolled, capturing every glare, every clenched jaw, as the two icons faced off like duelists in a forgotten western. Clint sat rigid in the guest chair, his eyes narrowed to slits, the lines on his face carved deeper by barely contained rage. He hadn't wanted to come here, hadn't wanted to sit under the bright lights and play nice for Ellen's cheerful audience. But his agent had insisted, claiming it was good for his latest film's press. Now, he regretted every second of it. Ellen, perched on her usual host's seat, leaned forward, her smile tight, her voice edged with something sharp beneath the warmth. The audience sensed it, their anticipation turning to unease. "You know, Clint," Ellen began, her tone deceptively light, "some folks say your new movie glorifies violence, that it's out of touch with today's values. Care to defend that?" The question landed like a jab, and the crowd gasped softly. It wasn't the usual softball opening. Ellen's eyes glinted, daring him to snap back. She knew his reputation, knew he wouldn't take the bait lightly, and she was ready for a fight. Clint's fingers tightened on the armrests, the leather creaking under his grip. "Out of touch?" he growled, his voice low. "Dangerous. Maybe you're the one out of touch, Ellen, sitting here in your cozy little bubble, preaching to people who don't know better." The audience froze, the air sucked out of the room. His words were a slap, and Ellen's smile vanished, replaced by a hard stare. She'd invited him to promote his film, but the real reason for this clash ran deeper, a grudge that had simmered. For years. Their history wasn't public knowledge, but it was personal. Decades ago, at a charity gala, Ellen had made a snide remark about Clint's work, calling it mindless macho nonsense in front of industry bigwigs. Clint, never one to forget a slight, had carried the insult like a stone in his shoe. Ellen, meanwhile, had heard whispers of Clint dismissing her show as fluffy garbage to mutual friends. Neither had confronted the other directly until now. This stage was their battlefield, and neither was backing down. "You think you're above it all, don't you?" Ellen shot back, her voice rising, shedding its polished charm. "You waltz in here, acting like your way is the only way, like the rest of us are just playing pretend." She leaned closer, her hands slamming down on the desk for emphasis. The audience flinched, some clutching their armrests, others whispering to their neighbors. They hadn't expected this, not from Ellen, whose laughter usually filled the room. Clint's lips curled into a sneer. "At least I don't hide behind a fake grin, pretending everything's fine while the world's burning," he said, his words dripping with contempt. He stood, towering over the set, his presence commanding despite his age. The cameras zoomed in, catching the fire in his eyes. "You want to talk about my movie? Fine. But don't act like you know what it takes to tell a real story, not when all you do is dance and give away cars." The audience erupted into gasps and murmurs, some cheering Clint's boldness, others stunned by his venom. Ellen's face flushed, her composure cracking like thin ice. She stood too, matching his height, refusing to be cowed. "You think you're so tough, Clint? You think you can come on to my show and insult me? This is my house, and you don't get to disrespect me here." Her voice was a whip, sharp and unyielding, and the crowd roared, torn between shock and excitement. The stage felt smaller now, the space between them charged with raw hostility. The producers in the control booth exchanged panicked glances, unsure whether to cut to commercial, but the audience was riveted, their eyes darting between Clint's steely glare and Ellen's blazing defiance. This wasn't just an argument, it was a reckoning. years of resentment boiling over in front of millions. And it was only the beginning. Clint Eastwood's shadow loomed across the studio floor, his stance unyielding, as if he were facing down an outlaw in one of his old films. The audience held its breath, their eyes wide, caught in the electric pull of the moment. Ellen DeGeneres stood her ground, her fists clenched at her sides, her usual warmth replaced by a fire that matched Clint's own. The stage was a powder keg, and every word threatened to spark an explosion. "You think you can bully me on my own show?" Ellen snapped, her voice cutting through the tense silence. She stepped closer, her eyes locked on his, refusing to blink. "I've dealt with tougher than you, Clint, and I don't scare easy." The crowd murmured, some nodding in support, others stunned by her ferocity. This wasn't the Ellen they knew, the one who charmed with jokes and kindness. This was a woman pushed to her limit, ready to fight. Clint's jaw tightened, his weathered face a mask of disdain. "Tough?" he scoffed, his voice gravelly, biting. "You call handing out prizes and clapping like a trained SEAL tough? Spare me. Ellen, you wouldn't last a day in my world." He turned slightly, addressing the audience now, his words laced with venom. "She thinks she knows struggle, but all she knows is how to play nice for the cameras." The crowd split, some cheering his raw honesty, others booing his cruelty. Ellen's laugh was sharp, humorless, slicing through the noise. "Your world?" she shot back, circling the desk to face him directly. "Your world's a fantasy, Clint. All guns and glory, no substance. You think you're some kind of hero, but you're just a relic, stuck in the past." Her words were a blade, aimed to wound, and they hit their mark. Clint's eyes darkened, his hands balling into fists, the air around him seeming to crackle with suppressed rage. The audience felt the shift, their excitement tinged with unease. This wasn't just a spat, it was personal, vicious, each jab digging deeper into old wounds. The producers, sweating in the control booth, debated cutting the feed, but the ratings were soaring. Every second of this raw, unfiltered clash was gold. The cameras stayed tight on the two, capturing every twitch, every snarl, as the studio became a gladiator's arena. "You don't know me," Clint growled, his voice low, dangerous, like a storm gathering strength. He stepped closer, closing the gap. Between them, his presence overwhelming. "You think you can judge me? You, with your perfect little life, your perfect little show? I've seen things, done things, you'd never understand." His words carried the weight of years, of battles fought on and off the screen. And for a moment, Ellen faltered, her confidence flickering. But she recovered fast, her chin lifting defiantly. "Don't you dare play the martyr," she hissed, her voice trembling with fury. "You think you're the only one who's faced hardship? I've clawed my way up, taken hits you can't imagine, and I did it without stomping on everyone else." She pointed at him, her fingers steady, accusing. "You're not a legend, Clint. You're just mean, and I'm done letting you act like you're better than me." The crowd roared, some leaping to their feet, their applause a mix of shock and admiration. Ellen's words had struck a chord, her defiance resonating with those who saw her as one of their own. But Clint wasn't swayed. His sneer returned, colder now, more deliberate. "You want to talk about mean?" he said, his voice a low rumble. "Let's talk about that gala, Ellen. Let's talk about how you humiliated me in front of half of Hollywood, thinking you were so clever." Ellen's face paled, the memory hitting her like a slap. She hadn't expected him to bring it up. Not here, not now. The audience leaned forward, sensing a revelation, their whispers buzzing like static. "You still hold on to that?" she said, her voice quieter but no less fierce. "That was years ago, Clint. You want to drag up the past? Fine. Let's talk about what you said about me, how you called my work a joke to anyone who'd listen." The stage seemed to shrink, the world narrowing to just the two of them, their grievances laid bare. The audience was no longer just spectators. They were witnesses to a war, one that had been brewing for decades. Clint's eyes burned with a fire that hadn't dimmed with age, and Ellen's resolve hardened, her anger a shield against his onslaught. The fight was far from over, and the worst was yet to come. A hush fell over the studio, the kind that follows a thunderclap, as Clint Eastwood and Ellen DeGeneres stood locked in their verbal duel. The audience sat on edge, their hearts pounding, caught in the raw intensity of a feud now stripped to its core. The stage lights burned hotter, casting stark shadows that seemed to dance with the anger radiating from both figures. What had started as a promotional appearance had spiraled into a public airing of deeply personal grievances, and neither was willing to yield. Ellen's chest heaved, her eyes blazing as she absorbed Clint's accusation. "You want to talk about—" "Who said what?" she fired back, her voice steady but laced with venom. "You spread lies about me, Clint, told people I was a fraud, that my success was just luck. You think I didn't hear it?" She took a step toward him, her posture defiant, unyielding. "I built this show from nothing, and you, with your smug grin, tried to tear it down." Clint's laugh was harsh, a guttural sound that echoed through the room. "Lies?" he spat, his hands slicing the air for emphasis. "I said what I saw, Ellen. You play the saint, but you're as cutthroat as anyone in this town. Don't pretend you're clean." His words were a challenge, daring her to admit her own flaws, and the audience gasped, some clutching their neighbors, others nodding as if they'd long suspected her polished image hid sharper edges. The crowd's reaction fueled Ellen's fury. She whirled to face them, her expression a mix of betrayal and resolve. "You think he's right?" she demanded, her voice rising, sharp enough to cut glass. "You think I'm fake? I've given everything to this show, to you, and this man comes here to spit on it." Her words were a plea and a rebuke, pulling the audience into the fray. Some shouted encouragement, others sat silent, torn by the clash of two titans they admired. Clint seized the moment, his voice booming over the noise. "Don't drag them into this," he snarled, pointing at the crowd. "This is between you and me, Ellen. You want to talk about giving? I've poured my life into my work, taken risks you can't imagine, and you have the nerve to call me a relic?" His eyes narrowed, his tone dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You're the one chasing applause, not truth." The accusation stung, and Ellen's face twisted with rage. "Truth?" she shot back, her voice trembling with emotion. "Your truth is just violence and ego, Clint. You make films that glorify pain, then act like you're above everyone else. I'm sick of it." She turned to the audience again, her hands outstretched, imploring. "He thinks he can walk in here and judge me, judge all of us. Are you going to let him?" The crowd erupted, a chaotic mix of cheers and jeers, some standing to clap for Ellen, others shouting support for Clint. The studio felt like a pressure cooker, the air thick with conflicting loyalties. The producers, now pale with panic, signaled frantically from the sidelines, but the cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of the chaos. This was no longer a talk show. It was a spectacle, a collision of wills that demanded a victor. Clint's patience snapped. He stepped closer, his voice a low growl, meant for Ellen alone, but caught by the microphones. "You don't get to lecture me," he said, each word deliberate, heavy. "I've earned my place, fought for it, while you rode a wave of charm. You want to talk about ego? Look in the mirror." His finger jabbed toward her, stopping just short of her chest, and the audience fell silent, sensing the line he'd nearly crossed. Ellen's eyes flashed, but she held her ground, her voice icy. "You think you're untouchable, don't you?" she said, her words slow, deliberate. "You think your name, your legacy, gives you the right to trample over me. But you're wrong, Clint. I'm not afraid of you." She straightened, her defiance a shield, and for a moment the studio seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next blow. The tension was unbearable, the weight of their words pressing down on everyone in the room. The audience, no longer just spectators, felt the sting of every insult, the pain of every truth exposed. Clint and Ellen stood inches apart, their anger a living thing, pulsing between them. The fight had reached a fever pitch, but beneath the rage, something else was emerging. A glimmer of mutual respect, though neither would admit it yet. The stage was set for a reckoning, one that would leave only one standing tall. The studio pulsed with raw energy, every eye fixed on the stage where Clint Eastwood and Ellen DeGeneres stood, their faces etched with defiance. The audience, now, a sea of raised voices and clenched fists, felt the weight of the moment, as if the air itself could shatter. The cameras, unblinking, captured the standoff, the culmination of years of buried slights and unspoken truths. This was no longer about a talk show or a movie. It was about pride, legacy, and who would walk away unbroken. Ellen's voice broke the charged silence, steady but fierce, like a blade honed sharp. "You think you can intimidate me, Clint? You think I'll back down because you're a legend?" She stepped forward, closing the gap, her eyes never leaving his. "I'm not that girl from the gala anymore. I've fought for my place, same as you, and I won't let you diminish it." Her words carried a quiet power, a strength that silenced the crowd, their cheers fading into rapt attention. Clint's expression flickered, a crack in his iron facade. Her words hit deeper than he'd expected, stirring memories of his own battles, his own climb from nothing. But he wasn't ready to concede. "You talk about fighting," he said, his voice rough, unyielding. "But fighting isn't just standing up, Ellen. It's carrying the weight, year after year without breaking. You think you've done that? Prove it." His challenge hung heavy, a gauntlet thrown at her feet. The audience leaned forward, their breaths held, sensing the shift. This wasn't just a clash of egos anymore. It was a test, a demand for authenticity. Ellen's lips pressed into a thin line, her mind racing. She could feel the eyes of millions, not just in the studio but beyond, waiting for her response. "You want proof?" she said, her voice rising, clear and commanding. "Look at this show. Look at these people." She gestured to the crowd, her hand sweeping wide. "I've lifted them up, given them hope, when you were busy making heroes out of pain." The crowd roared, their applause a tidal wave, some standing to cheer her on. But Clint wasn't swayed. He shook his head, his voice cutting through the noise, like a gunshot. "Hope?" he said, his tone laced with scorn. "You give them distractions, Ellen, not answers. My work shows the world as it is, not some fairy tale where everyone gets a prize." He turned to the audience, his gaze piercing. "You want truth? It's messy, it's hard, and it doesn't come with a laugh track." The room split again, voices clashing, some shouting for Clint, others for Ellen. The producers, now resigned to the chaos, let the cameras roll, knowing this moment would define careers. Ellen's hands trembled, not with fear but with the weight of what came next. She took a breath, her eyes locking onto Clint's, and when she spoke, her voice was raw, unguarded. "You're right," she said, the admission stunning the room into silence. "Truth is messy, but so is kindness, Clint. So is building something that lasts. You and I, we're not so different. We both fight, just in our own ways." Clint froze, her words catching him off guard. For the first time, his guard lowered, his eyes searching hers. The audience felt it too, a shift from war to understanding, though the tension remained. "Maybe," he said at last, his voice softer, grudging. "But you still owe me for that gala." A faint smirk tugged at his lips, the first sign of warmth, and the crowd chuckled, the sound a release of pent-up nerves. Ellen matched his smirk, her own fire still burning but tempered now. "And you owe me for calling my show a joke," she countered, her tone lighter but firm. She extended her hand, a gesture both challenge and truce. "Call it even?" The audience held its breath, watching as Clint considered, his hand hesitating before clasping hers in a firm shake. The room erupted, applause thundering, not for a victor, but for the fight itself, for two giants who had bared their souls and found common ground. As the cameras panned out, Clint and Ellen stood together, their handshake a symbol of respect forged in battle. The audience rose, their cheers a celebration of resilience, of truth and heart winning out. The studio, once a battlefield, now felt like hallowed ground, where two legends had clashed and emerged stronger. Clint nodded to Ellen, a silent acknowledgement, and she returned it, her smile genuine. They had fought, they had bled, and in the end, they had triumphed, not over each other, but together, leaving the stage as equals.